Love can be exhilarating and wonderful, but it can also be painful and complicated. Join clinical psychologist and best-selling author Dr. David Hawkins as he reveals the truth about the good, the bad, and the ugly aspects of relationships. Listen in as he gives you practical tips for hope and healing. Welcome to the podcast, Mad in Love.
We are back. We're doing a podcast, of course, called Mad in Love because we're looking at messy relationships and relationships that are fraught with narcissism and emotional abuse, NPD traits. And I have with me, I'm Dr. David Hawkins, director of the Marriage Recovery Center, and we specialize in narcissism and emotional abuse and all things kind of related to challenging and difficult relationships, which they are. I mean, at least the couples that come and work with us. But I have with me today in this podcast, again, Sharmen Kimbrough. I'm going to have her introduce herself, but she's been with the Marriage Recovery Center for years, and we've done many intensives together. We've rolled up our sleeves, Sharmen, and seen the best and the worst of people and the best and the worst in relationships. And so we're going to continue today. We just didn't get, there's so many things to talk about with emotional abuse. We'll do our best to stay focused today. We're going to talk about some additional facets of emotional abuse and what we see, but tell us a little bit about yourself and where are you at in this stage of your life, career, and this topic of emotional abuse and narcissism.
Yeah,
welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Sharmen Kimbrough. Like Dr. Hawkins said, I've been here with the Marriage Recovery Center for several years, since 2015, actually. So I've had a lot of experience just helping couples, people in general, not always couples, but people in general, to just recover from the trauma of difficult relationships, particularly impacted by emotional abuse and narcissism and spiritual abuse and that kind of thing. So where I am now, just still chugging along, letting my story bring hope to other people's story, because I've been there, done that as well, and just kind of bring to the table how I've survived, and people can see that I'm still alive and well. So that in itself is encouragement that there's a way through this. So just use that to be an encouragement.
I want to comment on that, Sharmen. This field of emotional abuse and narcissism is fraught with so much negativity, so much downcast in spirit, so much, frankly, depression and hopelessness. And to look at you and to see you smile, and I know you do bring a word of encouragement. So from the very outset here, you're conveying to people that there is life beyond this, or there is overcoming. It's not just coping. It's not just coping and adapting and accommodating and kind of making the best of the situation. And I'm not faulting anybody there, but you don't believe in that. You believe that there's overcoming and.
Oh yeah. Yeah. The reality of life is that no one gets through life unscathed by trauma. Like, that's the reality of life. And so being able to embrace trauma, not in the sense that it just is meant to destroy you, but that it is a part of life meant to be overcome. So, we talk a lot about the redemption story that, as a Christ-centered organization, we have this idea that God is using everything about life to be a story of redemption. And it wouldn't be a very big story if there wasn't anything that needed to be redeemed.
Oh my.
And so walking through the stuff to be able to see life and see joy, to carry grief even while you're still reaching for joy, is the adventure of life. So yes, I do believe that there is a way to overcome. I have seen people overcome things you cannot even imagine. And so it is true. There is life on the other side, but it must be fought for. Because if you just go with the flow, you're just going to end up at the bottom of the river somewhere. Because all things return to dust, right?
That's a quotable quote. Okay, all right. So yeah, let's not just go with the flow. Let's swim upstream and reach dry ground and then celebrate. So this is the podcast, and Mad in Love is about overcoming messiness in relationships and being victorious in relationships. Just for anybody who's just now tuning into this podcast, we define emotional abuse. I think, Sharmen, you would agree. This is we come up with new definitions and new ways of looking at this. I used to say, well, it's just the abuse of power and control. It is that, but it is. We'll use the gender males. More men than women are narcissistic and emotionally abusive, though it's not limited to that. We're going to talk about that today. But it is the abuse of power and control. It is an attitude of superiority. It is grandiosity. It's entitlement. It's taking more than one deserves. It is overpowering another. It's the lack of mutuality. It is a man being thin-skinned and easily feeling easily affronted and then overpowering and being defensive. And so it is all those things. So it's emotional immaturity, it is entitlement, it's grandiosity, and it is a little bit of this. And I'd like you to comment on this, Sharmen. What I find, it's subtle. So often, it's not always subtle. There's overt emotional abuse, but there's covert emotional abuse. And so I think you would agree with me, it is often felt as much as it is seen and identified. So women feel the weight of this superiority. They feel victimized. They feel, but then they kind of lack mile markers. And so it's not a simple thing to say, that's emotional abuse. Do you want to comment on that, and then we'll roll forward?
Yeah, a quick comment. You talk about the idea that more men are lean towards narcissistic abuse, emotional abuse, but I would say, it is equal in the sense that women are immature as well, can be immature as well, but how they exhibit it is more often in traits of codependency rather than narcissism. But I know a lot of our listeners may have heard me say this before. I think narcissism and codependency are actually two ends of a spectrum. That, those higher in narcissistic qualities are immaturely trying to control their world to stay safe and get what they want by taking and taking and taking from the people around them. And so that's why it comes across as these domineering and grandiose and controlling mannerisms. Whereas codependency, on the other hand, is still immaturity. It's hiding. It's managing, controlling the world around them to get what they want, but it looks like giving and giving and giving. And since women are more naturally inclined to nurturing relationships, I think it lends itself to them being, more likely to be diagnosed as codependent rather than narcissistic. But the idea is the same, that health is somewhere in the middle. Where there is interdependence, and it is giving and taking, but in a healthy way where you are assertively asking for what you need and assertively giving what you want to, not having it taken from you, where free choice and mutuality and reciprocity are part of the equation. So, I think all of us fall on that spectrum somewhere, and the closer we are to being real, coming out of hiding, being authentic, the healthier we tend to be. But in actuality, both ends are about control, about staying safe, about hiding, because that's what feels safe.
That's a great word, and that's for yet another broadcast or podcast. And because codependency and narcissism both are, as you were talking, I was thinking, these folks lack a healthy sense of self. I mean, codependence has been defined as a lack of sense of self. And so boundaries are very opaque. They're not clear. They're not firm. Certainly the narcissist, I was running a group the other day, Sharmen, of men who they've embraced that they are emotionally abusive. And I was asking them, are you able to say what you need? Are you able to identify your feelings and your concerns and ask for what you need? Now, some listeners are going to go, well, Dr. Hawkins, what are you promoting men being aggressive? And I say, no, I'm not. But I'm promoting men being healthy and identifying. I asked them to raise their hands if they were able to identify their feelings, have a feeling vocabulary. Check, no. Are they able to consider, do they know what they need? Check, no. Are they able to ask for what they need in a healthy way? Check, no. And so then it's not rocket science to think if we don't know what we need and what we want, we're going to end up going after it in a really distorted, whacked out, wonky way. And so there you have it. And there you have codependence and narcissism. And this is another podcast. There's hope in that, though. Like, okay, you mean this isn't an untreatable character disorder that, it can be a character disorder, but we can help men and women develop a healthy sense of self. Any further comments on that?
Yeah, no one is a robot. The thing that makes us human is the ability to choose. And in any given moment, we get to decide what we're doing in this moment. And so another reason why there is hope that even those high on the spectrum somewhere, they have a choice, and to learn a better motivation for why to make better choices. That's the key to actually becoming healthy and becoming assertive rather than aggressive, knowing what you want, knowing what you need, being able to ask it to be real, not read minds, all those things that we do that are so unhealthy and push people around. But the reality is nobody is a robot. They're not just being controlled by something. And so we get the label because of the behavior. The behavior isn't because of the label. Wow.
That was good. Say it one more time. It's so good.
Yeah. So the behavior is what determines the label. People look at the behavior and say, this person is whatever disorder. The behavior did not come from the label. We didn't call this person narcissistic personality disordered or whatever, and then thus he became this thing. So again, it's the behavior, it's the way people show up in life that is the point. The label just helps to make sense of it. Helped you see what you're dealing with.
So by the way, everybody listening, that was really priceless, what Sharmen just said. So therefore, please, and I'm going to go off on a really quick tangent, please put aside he's being narcissistic. Put that aside, please. Comment on, I noticed you walked out of the room when I was talking. I noticed that you just talked over me. I noticed that you name the behavior that's going on and talk about how you feel about that behavior and what you want changed. Now we can get to something. We're not going to get anywhere by starting with, you're narcissistic, that's all you are. Okay, anyway. All right, segue. We need to talk about, would you comment again? We did a little bit of this in the last podcast, but can emotional abuse be seen in both men and women? And more comments on that. What do you see there in regards to what's happening? Are women narcissistic as well? What do you, by the way, you specialize, you've been doing this, and this woman is highly, highly trained. And I don't say that just because you're on a podcast with me. You know that I hope you know that I have immense respect for you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I do see narcissism in both men and women. More often when I'm talking with men who are talking about a narcissistic person in their life, however, they're often talking about their mother more so than their wives, which is interesting to me that their experience, their primary experience of a woman who is narcissistic has been their mother, which naturally should come with some sense of overpowering and control, because it's a parent's job to discipline and parent their children. However, when it all goes awry, then they are stuck experiencing the trauma of neglect and abandonment and not being seen and heard for who they are. And so, that kind of shapes their experience of what it is to be like in relationship with women. More often in the people I see, the way men experience the narcissistic abuse, so to speak, is actually more the codependent types of behaviors where, where women they're rightfully afraid because they're responding to his bad behavior, but they don't ask for what they need. And when they do, they do it in such a way that they're really dancing around the topic and it feels controlling, and they leave room to make him read her mind, or she has to read his mind. And those kinds of things can feel emotionally abusive as well. And so a good bit of it is learned responses to abnormal behavior that just kind of snowballs into it all being a mess, where nobody's communicating well. And when there's not collaboration, when there's not freedom to show up and talk about things, it feels abusive because you feel like you have to hide. And so I see it in both the men and women, but again, experienced a little bit differently because men tend to be more driven by doing well in their work, by focusing on what they can succeed in. Things, when it's not working well in relationships, they go to other things and find success in that. And so it feels like they're, abandoning more often than not. Whereas women, because they're more driven, more often, it's stereotypical, but generally speaking, women are more driven to address the relationship. And so they come in trying to, they spend more time rejecting their spouses because they're trying to get to, to talk about the things of the relationship that are important to them, where the men are trying to flee that part of it because they're not succeeding there. And that can feel like rejection because they're not accepted for what they do, so to speak. Women are not accepted for what they say and how they love. Men aren't either because they're coming at it from two different angles. And it feels abusive because nobody's working together. Nobody's collaborating. There's no connection. There's lots of hiding going on. People hiding who they really are because of actually either fear or past trauma that has put them in a place where they have come to believe that it's their job to protect themselves and they can never show their real selves to people. And so there's not the real connection. So they try to connect on these surface level areas where they're not speaking the same language, so to speak. And I don't mean the 5 love languages. I mean the same, like, reaching for connection type of language. Just because their focuses are different.
You've touched on something I'd like you to comment on. I have seen, and I think you have too, women who can appear narcissistic because they are over-functioning. I'd like you to comment on the topic of over-functioning. Frankly, I have countless women who are monitoring their husbands. They are checking iPhones. They're checking mileage. They're checking this, checking that, monitoring calories eaten, monitoring. I mean, just hyper vigilant, and maybe that's the piece. Maybe it's part of a trauma response, but it can look. I mean, a man then comes to me and says, "Oh, you're not going to believe, you think I'm controlling. She is watching my this and watching my that and doing my this and doing my that." But I wonder, I don't want to direct you here, Sharmen, but I wonder if all of that still is some way of her still trying to connect in some way, or just establish relationship.
I think it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a couple of nuances to that. One is that when God said it wasn't good for man to be alone, he said, I will create an Ezer Kenegdo for him, which has been translated into helper. But it's way bigger than just keeping his bed warm and keeping his belly fed and the kids obedient and keeping house. It's not that kind of helper. The connotation of that word is an influence that can bring him life. Right? It's a word only otherwise used in Scripture of the Holy Spirit at a man's greatest point of need in the heat of a battle when he is at a loss to do anything else to save himself. So it's in a woman's DNA to bring this life-giving influence to her spouse, right? It's like a powerful relationship is one in which a husband actually leans into the influence of his wife and lets that bring life to the relationship rather than trying to make her small. So there's that. It's in our DNA to be an influence. I think when that foundational thing is broken by trauma, that's still impacting her desire to fix it, to bring life to it. And so she's tries every way possible to grasp at anything that would be like, if he could just see this, it would fix this, it would bring life, it would connect us, it would do all of that. So there's that. And then there's the self-protective piece too. Because it's so broken, because she feels so abandoned and betrayed and left alone, it's also her way of trying to make sense of the world, to figure out what's really going on, to protect herself. And so it's kind of a good and bad thing in some ways, but learning to find the healthy balance, recognizing her desire to bring life to him is good and real, but he's not accepting it right now. So how do we leave him room to connect his own dots, to own his own behavior, to make decisions about his own steps? Because at the end of the day, she needs him to man up and own his own stuff, to be a man, and then speak into that. And it's totally different dynamic than if she's trying to prop up someone who doesn't even want to be propped up, who refuses to listen to her anymore.
So you would say, it sounds like you're saying this, that there's a foundational difference. Her motivation is for connection. Her motivation is to have a man show up and be there in her life. And she just is, every effort is, can't you see that? Don't you know that? Won't you try this? Why won't you? Let me write you another letter. Let me send you another email. Let me send you another article to read. So we don't see him, by the way. I don't know what the comparisons are, but I literally never, I don't think I've ever heard of a man sending her articles on ways to enrich the relationship. There must be some, but I can't remember an example. I can think of countless examples of the woman sending the man, here are ways to love, to be a healthier man. Here are ways to... So anyway, would you say, I'm going to ask you the question, would you say that there's a foundational difference in motivation? Hers is not to control, though it looks like control, but...
Absolutely.
Go ahead. Yeah, speak to that.
Yeah, I think she is absolutely motivated by trying to connect, right? So the articles that she sends, the way she tries to make sense of what he has going on, the way she tries to eliminate distractions, other women, or, other addictions or whatever. It's all about drawing her to, she wants his attention on her, not to control him, but to be connected to him. Totally. And I think men want to be connected as well, but they look at connection very differently.
You didn't look very convinced when you said that.
No, I talk to lots of men who are looking for depth. They're looking to be loved, but how they define it is in very different terms.
This is a bit of a tangent, but yeah, I don't think it's any secret to women, especially when I ask men, do you love your wife? Oh, yeah, cool. What a dumb question. Well, tell me about that. Well, well, I, she's a good cook, and she's been great with the kids. Yeah, right. But tell me about her. Tell me what you love about her character. Oh, well, I mean, I love her character. Right. I got that. Tell me what, how, exactly, specifics. They can't do it. Mm-hmm. They can't do it. So, yeah. Hence, I did, about the videos, what she wants him to know. Video number 1 is she wants him to see her as an individual, that there's depth to her character and what she lives for, what's alive. And anyway, that was a quick tangent. But so motivations, back to that. So the motivations are different. His are self-protective. That's what I see in men. Self-protective. They don't want to feel inadequate. They don't want to feel inept, incompetent, weak. They don't want to feel a sense of healthy shame or healthy remorse. They don't want to sit with that stuff. And so their actions, their attempt to control seems to be driven by wanting a certain outcome, but also wanting to be protected from a lot of crummy feelings. Hers don't seem driven by that, by and large.
I think she is self-protective, but it goes back to what you just said about being known. She's self-protective in that sense that first of all, he doesn't really know her, right? And so a lot of her defensiveness comes out when he misjudges her, and then she has to be defensive about who she is. And it usually boils down to an argument that looks like, if you really knew me, you wouldn't think that about me, that type of thing. So I think, to be loved means to be known. But in the broken world that we live in, it's so scary to be known. When Adam and Eve sinned and went into hiding, they thought they could hide from the God that created them even, but we've been hiding ever since. And recovery looks like coming out of hiding. It looks like being able to be real about who we really are. But yeah, that means to be known. So kind of another little tangent of, again, the idea of healing, that coming out of hiding looks like being known. One of the things we have to work on with our couples is getting them to a place where they can make room for the other person to be very different than the paradigm they've made up in their head, the narrative they've made up in their head about the other person, and making space for that. And then deciding what they're going to do with the relationship, because they might not like what they really see, but then they're dealing with reality then, not a narrative, and that's going to be better than the narrative they've been trying to live under that's brought whatever mess has brought them to us.
Love it. Segue here. So many women, you've heard me, we've done conferences, multiple conferences together. You've heard me say this. When a woman calls me up, I still can't get over this, Sharmen. I want you to comment on, I'm sure you see it too. When a woman calls me up and shares her story the first time, and I give her plenty of time, and in fact, I often, when I'm doing my evaluations, you do these too, I often will say, sounds like you've got more to say. Let's set up an additional time. And she thank you. We set up an additional time. She's got a lot more to say. And sometimes I set up a third time. At the end of it, or somewhere in the process, she looks at me. I'm going to get a little choked up here. She just is so thankful to be seen and to be heard. And when I say the words, I believe you, comment on that, because she has these women who have been abused. They've reached out and they just don't, they're told by well-meaning pastors and so on, it takes two to tango. We know there's two sides of the story. Anyway, so comment on, and she's afraid, and particularly like you to comment on, she's really afraid of that call to us. Like, is he going to be able, this guy, you've heard this story 1,000 times.
Mm-hmm.
He is smooth talking, Dr. Hawkins. This is what she'll say. I trust you. She doesn't really, but she says that. I trust you. Mm-hmm. I know you've written about this. I know you've seen it 1,000 times, but he is smooth. You're going to get taken in probably, and I don't know that I can trust you to really hear my story. All right, what do you see?
So, yeah, I see that same thing too. One of the things I tell, the guys too, but I work most often with the women, but I tell them, having that fear is valid because the reality of that fear is if he continues to do that, you're still not building the relationship. It's still not creating a context for you to build a relationship. But that's exactly what I want you to pay attention to, not to how he's a hypocrite or a smooth talker and he's winning over the counselor as his new best buddy, but that if he does that, it's revealing his heart towards the relationship to you again. And the best thing you can do is quit denying that he's not offering you a relationship in that place, that he's actually just trying to make really good friends and protect his own image still. So that you take the opportunity to make some different choices in that place, because there's not going to be change until you're serious about saying, I'm not going to participate in this any longer. So if he's in the counseling office and you see he's winning over the counselor and they're new best friends and they're talking about playing tennis together or whatever, and you're just sitting back again, feeling that depth of betrayal, that now here's another counselor even that's not standing up for you. Instead of sitting there, I say, look at that and go, okay, I have done everything I know to do to invite this man into a different type of relationship. There comes a point where I have to honor that he is bringing to the table what he wants to bring to the table. And honoring it might look like, I'm done with that. He can have that counselor. I'm going to go see my attorney or whatever the next step is. But it's perfect opportunity to say, now it's time for an intervention. Because you can, again, stay stuck in that pit where you end up just feeling more and more betrayed, more and more a victim of the circumstances, because what's not happening because what you want to have happen is not happening. Or you can go, wait a minute, what I wanted to happen is not happening. And I have some choices about what I do next because he would rather spend all of this time and money to be really good friends with Sharmen or Dr. Hawkins rather than look at what's going on in his relationship, the person he's married to. And so if he wants to be that way, I'm done trying to drag him into something different. It's my last hurrah at that. It's costing me too much.
I'm going to quote you here. Speak to this. Manipulation is only successful when the one being manipulated gives up their own agency to think, to choose, to process and respond. I'm going to read it again because it's so powerful. It's so empowering. Manipulation, this is true for any of us. This is a takeaway for me. Manipulation is only successful when the one being manipulated, that's you, that's me, whoever, when the one being manipulated gives up their own agency to think, to choose, to process, and respond. Comment some more on that.
Yeah, so one of the things, I've said this already, one of the things that makes us human, the most important thing that makes us human is free choice, the right room agency to choose. The problem is we grow up in a society, a culture that teaches that the highest form of godliness is compliance. Having someone else tell us what to do. And so we end up in cults or churches or families or marriages where our entire life is driven by our identity, worth, and value is in what someone tells us to do, right? That's totally manipulation. But when you can come back to your God-given right to choose it starts with that choice of surrender to him versus doing what's right in your own eyes. Like, that's the foundational piece. Everything else is a reflection of that. God never coerces us to choose him. It's not meaningful unless it's a free choice of our free will to say, God, you are my God. Here's my life, right? So that's reflected in every other part of our lives. So when we can take that back and realize the highest form of godliness is free choice to join into relationships, but also to step out of the ones that are toxic and evil and destroying who we are, that we're not created to be part of a collective. We are each unique and individual, and God has gifted each of us with something to bring to the table. And so learning to grab a hold of that, which is the human journey as well, learning who we are. What has God put in us to leave his mark on the world in our own way? That's what we're going to have to give an account for someday. So owning that looks like also saying, wait, like the person right next to me is really loud and obnoxious. He's really a bully, demanding that I be a certain thing or do a certain thing or whatever, but I don't have to go along.
Boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
So that segues. Let's talk about boundaries again. So this is. So you didn't use the word, but I think you were almost like ready to, making choices means saying, yes, I will come alongside of you if this happens or that happens. I feel safe. I feel cared for. I feel loved. And if I don't, I'm going to step away in some fashion. But that's tough work. That is really, really tough work. Speak to that.
Yeah. So it is tough work, but Proverbs says wisdom is supreme, though it costs everything you have, get understanding. And goes on to talk about how the prudent see danger and take refuge, but the fool keeps going and suffers for it. So is it tough a tough road to find wisdom, to find truth, to find abundant life? Absolutely. But again, it's part of the redemption story. So it is hard work, and yet it is our prerogative to chase after what is good and right and true, to do that work of finding who we are, who God has created us to be, and then walking a path that is congruent with that, which includes boundaries on that path to keep us from falling off the cliff, right? But those boundaries are those things that we put into place where we decide who we're going to hang out with, what we're going to do with our time and our efforts and our money and our energy. It's us determining our steps. Boundaries aren't what we tell other people to do because, again, that's their prerogative to decide that for themselves. But it's what we put into place so that we stay on the road to wisdom versus getting pulled off or pushed off the cliff and become screaming, crazy, drunken, whatever we get when all our buttons are pushed and we're not paying attention to our boundaries.
Describe for me, I'm going to throw you a little bit of a curveball here. Describe for me a woman, obviously unnamed, but a woman who might come to your mind who's doing this well. What does she look like? That she's identified the manipulation. She's identified the emotional abuse. She can see it now. She can name it now. I don't want to keep putting words because I want you to describe this woman and how is she establishing boundaries, even perhaps staying in the relationship or maybe not staying in the relationship. What does she look like?
I would say one of the number one markers is the questions she's asking herself, right? So when a woman is a mess, a basket case, has no sense of safety, she's asking herself, what do I have to do to be safe? How do I make him be safe? How do I make him stop, right? But a woman who is more taking control of her own agency,
grounded,
more centered, authentic, actually knows who she is and where she's going, the questions she's asking herself are, what do I want to participate in? So that the frame of reference is her sense of self, her being on the road she wants to be on, what do I want to participate in? And if he's going off the deep end, she doesn't have to try to get him back in line. It'll feel disconcerting because every time, he does something destructive, it's breaking the relationship. But to be able to maintain her groundedness and center apart from what is happening in the relationship, that's actually where she has the best room to grow and make the relationship be better where she can, because she's not going to engage in the destructiveness. She's going to honor him by letting him fall off the cliff all by himself at this point, because that's what he wanted, right? But she's not going down with him. So she'll disengage. She'll go, hang out with a friend instead of sit at home letting him yell and scream at her. Or she'll drive her own car rather than sit in a car with him where she's a captive audience to his road rages or whatever. Like if she doesn't want to participate in that, that's the question she's going to be answering, because again, it's more in control of her own self, not trying to fix the external environment to feel safe, but to be her own steadfastness in the middle of an unsafe environment.
You and I both know about dialectical behavior therapy. You might be saying, where's he going now with this? But I'll tell you where I'm going. What you just described, so dialectical behavior therapy, DBT, folks, is a great thing, and we promote it, we use it. We've got a specialist on staff, and Sharmen and I, all of us, are using it to a certain extent. DBT says when we change, everything changes. So it's like a mobile, I describe it as a mobile. When one piece changes, every other piece it has to change. Every other piece has to change. And I know we've got people saying, no, you don't know the man I'm with. Back to your statement, I can imagine a woman who has stepped back and is getting herself centered, grounded. Her faith in God is solid. She's on her own journey. She's establishing healthier boundaries. Would you say, now it's not we don't believe in magic. I don't believe in magic. No. So we're not saying it's magical, but would you say when she changes, it opens up all kinds of possibilities in her world for others to change as well? That I'll stop with this, but there's a notion. You and I also we're familiar with internal family systems therapy, and IFS says when one person in the room is self-led, centered, established in God, clear, it influences everybody. Does it magically change everybody? No, but it influences them, and they are more likely to behave if we don't add to the problems. Comment on any of that. That was a whole mouthful.
Yeah. So the part I do want to comment on is definitely don't want any of our listeners to think that if they just changed, it would make other people change, because again, that would take away free will. No, not saying that. But when you change and your perspective changes, things are different. Right? When you're practicing and training in responding differently, in being different, in, creating different habits for yourself, it is going to change how you perceive the environment around you in healthy ways, regardless of whether or not the people around you change. Now, there's a very high likelihood that when you quit enabling his bad behavior, he will change, because people do what they get rewarded for. So if he's no longer getting a reward for his bad behavior, something is going to change. Although oftentimes people who are used to using anger to get what they want or control to get what they want, they get angrier and meaner. So you have to be ready for that. In the short term, yeah, because that still isn't going to work either. Right? But the reality is you change because you want to be healthy. And that makes room for the people around you to have to take a hard look at their own selves too, If they still choose to be unhealthy, you're still going to have to put into place good boundaries to disengage from where they're unhealthy and it's not good for you. But the reality is, when you change, your perspective changes. It's kind of like if I were to go out and try to run a marathon right now, it would kill me and I wouldn't like a single bit of it.
Okay.
I like it literally. I'm very out of shape. It would kill me. But if I trained for that and I put my focus and my attention on what it took to be healthy and to be fit and to lift weights and to keep going when I'm discouraged and all, like, my focus is me getting to that place where I can run a marathon and it won't kill me. And it might actually feel good. Like, my perspective would be totally different because I'd be like, well, this feels good now because I've trained my body to need to move more often than sitting down. And so it's the same kind of idea with relationships. It's hard work. It takes a change in focus, what you're feeding yourself, your head, and doing what you need to do because it's the healthy thing to do, even if no one else comes alongside you. And if they want to be in relationship with you, they're going to have to offer you something different because that's the point. You can't change a relationship all by yourself because it requires two to intermingle. So they're going to have to figure out what they want to bring to the table. And if they don't, then like your relationship can only be as deep as what they offer. So you have to keep that in mind too. But you do what you do because you want to be a healthier person and have healthier relationships, not to make someone else change. The hope is that they will, but you can't make them.
So the worst that can happen is you're going to become healthier and happier. That's the worst. That's the worst.
Yep. Yeah.
And
worst
that's
case
a
scenario.
worst case scenario. And then there's all kinds of possibilities beyond that. All right.
Yep.
One more concept to unpack in today's podcast, Sharmen. How does religion play a part in the healing process?
So I would actually distinguish between religion and spirituality. Like, religion really speaks to the practices, the disciplines of religion, going to church, reading your Bible, praying, whatever those ministry-oriented things are, whereas spirituality is really about your heart with God, your heart connected to God. I think religion is good because it does have a lot of room to turn our hearts towards God, but I think it can also be used as a tool to beat up other people, to become oppressive. And so spirituality is really about the heart of God. And like I said a minute ago, I think everything actually stems from the whole point being God brings us to each of us to a point in our life where we're at that crossroad where we either choose to surrender to Him. My life is yours, God. Whatever you have for me today, the answer is yes. Surrender. Versus, nope, I'm going to order my life according to what I want and where I'm going and what I'm driven to do. And it requires that's a spiritual transformation in that place, one way or the other. And everything else stems from that. So when we're talking about relationships, if there isn't the right function, order versus disorder of that relationship with God, there can't be a right function or order in relationships with other people, because in reality, without God, you cannot love other people. Like, everything you do is about return on investment when it's you ordering your own world. Everything is about loving and being a part of God's kingdom when you are surrendered to God. And the only way you can do that is with Him in you. So how that plays a role in the healing process is if you're dealing with someone who is not surrendered to God, He's not going to ascribe to that sense of strength, of personhood, of that foundation of just having such a grounding in himself of who he is and what his value is because of God to love you well. And so working on that relationship looks more like, just addressing the bad behavior to see what's going to function, to build what you can in a relationship, but it's going to miss that real connection that comes with being spiritually matched, so to speak, spiritually aligned, because two people are surrendered to God. So I think, that's something really important to remember. A lot of the couples that come to us, more often than not, one or the other is more inclined to say, why don't we just see what God has to say about this? And the other is either saying, no, I don't want to hear about God, or is saying, well, I want to see what God has to say about this. You're supposed to be not withholding your body from me, and you're supposed to be obeying me. And, it gets turned around in really destructive ways. And so again, if you're grounded in God, like love him, heart, soul, mind, and strength, we don't take that desperation to other people to fill that place in us. We know who we are. We know where we're going. We're growing in that. Otherwise, it is about desperately trying to keep that hole filled, and it doesn't really work well. But like we can help couples have good relationships if they want to, but there has to be an understanding that without God, it is still based on the return on investment. Like, I'm going to do for you and you can do for me, and we can make this be beautiful together, but it's still going to lack some real depth of connection.
So good, so clear, Sharmen. I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about. And I don't know if there's anything else that you want to add. There's so much here. But I think this has been a good podcast to think about emotional abuse and what does it look like, and how do we come out of it in the future. I'll put a teaser out there. I want you, at least you and I, and maybe you and I and another colleague, to unpack the topic of inside the mind of the emotional abuser, and what does that look like, and hope for change. But I think as a teaser, I think we would both say it's all possible. It's all possible that we see people every day, men and women, who come to us, and to one extent or another, they're open to being influenced. They wouldn't have walked through our door had they not had some quest that they were after, something. So pain, it may show up on our doorstep as pain, and may show up on our doorstep as a complaint, a very loud complaint, but that still is someone saying, please help me. You agree with that?
Oh, yeah. And it's a moment in time where we get a chance to just see inside someone's heart, so to speak, and give them some tidbits of help and hope to see a different way. What they do with it is up to them, but just such an opportunity to go, wait a minute, there's more to life than what I'm seeing or experiencing. How can I tap into it? What do I need to look at? What needs to change? How do I grasp something different than what I have going on? Because we can. That's the thing. We can grasp something different if we want to. Yeah.
All right. Well, Sharmen, as always, thank you. We will have you again for sure. You're doing a great work with women and men, couples. But all right. So, listeners, if any of this resonates with you, and Sharmen and I think it resonates with everybody, because relationships are messy. And so we see, to one extent or another, we see emotional abuse in many, if not most, relationships. And we believe that change is possible. But at any rate, if any of this resonates with you, call our office and book a time with our trained client care team, and they will discuss with you how to get started. You should see a button at the bottom of the screen that you can click, and it will allow you to subscribe to future podcasts. Like we said, we're gonna talk about inside the mind of the emotionally abusive man and the emotionally abusive woman. So, all right. Thank you, everyone, for listening in. Sharmen, again, thank you for being a guest here. All right. Take care.
Thanks.